Have you ever felt?
Are you listening? Damn.
Both been here too long. You can't go back to Ireland or Poland or England, and I can't go back to Africa. And we will live here together, or we'll die here together. And it's not I am telling you. Time is telling you. You will listen or you will perish.
Many black educators were discriminated against as a result of white parents voicing concern over black educators teaching their children in the newly desegregated schools. Black educators were largely replaced by white, middle-class educators who did not necessarily understand the students of color in the classroom. As a result, this has caused the current trend we see now, where black school children are disproportionately impacted negatively in the education system. From the October 2nd, 2017 American Bar Association article, How Implicit Bias Impacts Our Children in Education.
Hey everyone, thank you for being here. In my last two videos, I discussed the adultification bias of young black girls and the abuse to prison pipeline. Prior to that, I touched on the school to prison pipeline, but I really wanted to revisit it. The school to prison pipeline disturbed me so much that I couldn't just touch on it and leave it. The fact that this is not only something that is done in America, but is so accepted that no one seems to object to the fact that young children are thrown away. So what is it? The school to prison pipeline is a disturbing phenomenon in this country in which mostly young males are routinely pushed out of their educational environments into juvenile court systems through a series of calculated school policies, educational inequalities, municipal policies, and the rise of police presence in schools. Once a young man is started on this path, he is rarely able to work his way out of the system on his own. This system disproportionately affects young men of color, more specifically, young black males. This system is not set up for success, but rather it is set up for failure. We can see it in the zero tolerance policies of suspensions and expulsions that many schools have adopted. This can affect students as young as 5 or 6. During my time working in the public school system, I saw firsthand how the negative effects that policies such as this and the inequalities in the classroom could do to a child's mental health and self-esteem as young as 5 and 6. I realized very early on that once a teacher felt a student was a problem, there was little this child could do to be seen as anything else other than an issue. But let's take a look at who is affected the most. Preschool. Unfortunately, the pipeline often starts there. Many preschools have also adopted a zero tolerance policy. Sadly, children that are most affected by this are young black preschoolers. These children, mostly boys, make up nearly half the students expelled from preschools. That's right, expelled from preschools. Here's the thing, they only represent 18% of the enrollment. Moving on up. In California, young black males are more likely to be suspended or expelled than any other students. You would think that this statistic comes from high school boys, but you would be incorrect. Instead, these are students from kindergarten to 3rd grade. But wait, there's more. Here are some of the words that are often used to refer to young black students from kindergarten to 3rd grade. Aggressive, destructive, and defiant. How can you as a child thrive if you are already seen as a problem at age 5? Why is the young black student very often singled out when it comes to confrontations with other students? Their stories are less likely to be believed or listened to. They have already been labeled by the education system, and this will follow them as they move on from primary school to middle school. This is where most of these young men will first encounter law enforcement and the juvenile judicial system. The older they get, the more violent they are perceived and the less likely they are to receive equal disciplinary action. 1 out of every 5 black males are suspended in middle school. That's 20%. This is compared to 7% of the middle school children overall. Now, if that boy is in foster care, the rate jumps from 20% to 36%. Also, suspension rates are typically higher in middle school. Here is another reason we call it the school to prison pipeline. High school. The view of young black men in school does not improve as they enter into high school. Take the below incident, for example. In 2012, 4 high school students were facing disciplinary action for smoking weed on campus. This is how the punishments were dealt out. 2 white female students were suspended for 5 days. 1 white male student received no disciplinary action. The remaining student was a black male, and he was suspended for a week, not to mention arrested. He pled guilty to being in possession of drug paraphernalia. Okay? Now keep in mind, the only student caught smoking was one of the girls. It wasn't until after she was caught that she implicated the other students. But only the black student was arrested for the drug paraphernalia. The girl was the one in possession of the paraphernalia. All of these above interactions from preschool to high school are rooted in the concept of implicit bias. Implicit bias, as mentioned earlier, is the unconscious favoritism toward or prejudice against people of a particular race, gender, etc. That influences one's actions or perceptions. Many of the young men who end up in the juvenile court system have experienced academic failure, have been removed from school, and or have had disciplinary problems. Which, as I pointed out, doesn't mean those problems are viewed or handled appropriately, but it does help to push them through the aforementioned pipeline, the court system. None of the above negative contacts with the justice system could happen without the implicit bias of many of the judges who are sentencing these children and young men to juvenile incarceration. In a study collected in 2015 by the Sentencing Project, the black youth incarceration rate was 433 per 100,000 compared to a rate of 86 per 100,000 for a white youth. How does this happen, you ask? Let me introduce you to the poster child for corrupt incarceration, Judge Ciavarelli. Judge Mark Ciavarelli was sentenced in 2011 for his involvement in the Kids for Cash scandal. He received $2.6 million from the co-owner and the builder of 2 for-profit juvenile facilities in Pennsylvania. He received this money in exchange for sentencing children to extended stays in these detention centers. Some of the offenses that these minors were sentenced for were as minimal as mocking a school principal on MySpace, trespassing in a vacant building, shoplifting a DVD. One child, Raheem Armitage, spent 10 months locked up when he was 16 for throwing a textbook and bruising a teacher's ankle.
She was a good kid. She was happy.
I was known for being the jokester.
Eddie, he was always a fireball.
We were talking about how funny it would be if we made a fake MySpace page about my vice principal.
I was trying to stay out of trouble. That's when everything started.
Whatever sins you have committed, you can't go back and undo it.
Chiavarella was a no-nonsense, zero-tolerance judge. He always jailed kids.
You are going to experience prison. I'll be glad to put you there.
The way Chiavarella ran the courtroom, you could have had F. Lee Bailey there, and the kids would have gone away.
There's a mechanism that takes over that keeps kids in that system.
No one listened because we were kids.
There was never any instance of guilt or innocence. They were locking him up.
Really high number of kids appearing without counsel.
We have no rights. He's in their custody now.
It is unbelievable. We're talking about children.
I wanted them to be scared out of their minds. I don't understand how that was a bad thing.
Former Luzerne County judge faces charges tonight in a scandal known as Kids for Cash.
$2.6 million
in return for sentencing kids to juvenile detention.
I'd never send a kid away for a penny. I'm not this mad judge who was just putting them in shackles, throwing kids away.
He went there as a free-spirited kid. He came out a hardened man, I would say.
Here I was saying we can trust that judge to be fair, and that's not what happened. I was scared every day.
I was only 14. All those years I missed.
This is not a cash for kids case.
You scumbag! You ruined my life! I still wake up from nightmares.
Even though hundreds of his convictions were thrown out years after these children were sentenced, nothing can give them back what he and the justice system stole from them. Not only were the young men and children mentioned above, but also the young, primarily young black men of today are being failed by a skewed system. A system that was literally never designed to see them as human beings with rights. And this system has never been truly corrected. Judge Ciavarelli is one of thousands of juvenile court judges in this country, and we would be naive to think he is the only one who is failing our youth. Yes, he is an extreme case, but he is a symptom of a disease process. He could not have operated as long as he did if he wasn't amongst those that supported and ignored his behavior. Yet we continue to assume that all the grown men who make their way into the prison and jails are there because every last one of them deserved it. The problem is, a large majority of them are there because somewhere between 5 and 18, they were failed by educators who inherently see these students as problems, a flawed educational system, overworked social workers, law enforcement not trained to properly handle the emotional and social issues of these young people, overzealous prosecutors, a juvenile court system set up to destroy youth offenders, juvenile facilities that are more often than not there to profit off of these incarcerated in one way or another. But above all else, they are being failed by a society at large. As heartbreaking as this is, hope is not lost. There are organizations that are out there fighting to make sure that these students are not failed along the way. Until next time, remember, this fight is not just for some of us, it is for all of us.